The ship was dying. Sayith could feel it in the way the floor trembled beneath her feet, in the way the lights flickered like candles in a storm. The Hymn of Gentle Tides had been a beautiful vessel once, a science ship built for exploration, for discovery, for the quiet work of mapping stars and cataloging life. Now it was a coffin drifting through the cold black of space, and the things killing it were enjoying every moment. The Krethval had come without warning. Their war swarm had dropped out of faster-than-light travel like a cloud of metal insects, 400 ships strong, each one bristling with weapons designed not just to destroy but to terrify. The Krethval were predators, not in the way that most species use the word. They were 9 feet tall, covered in armored scales, and they had built their entire civilization on one simple belief: the strong exist to take from the weak. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They consumed. And right now, they were consuming the Hymn of Gentle Tides one piece at a time. Sayith pressed her back against the wall of the communications room and tried to stop her hands from shaking. She was Velari, a small, fragile species with skin that glowed faintly blue when they were afraid. Right now, she was glowing so brightly she could see her own reflection in the cracked display screen across the room. Her people were diplomats, thinkers. They solved problems with words and patience and careful understanding. They had no weapons on this ship. They had never needed weapons before. Another explosion rocked the ship. Somewhere below her she heard screaming. The Krethval wanted what was stored in the ship's research computers, the coordinates to a nursery world, a planet far out on the edge of known space where life was just beginning to grow, where creatures were taking their first steps toward intelligence. The Velari had found it during a routine survey and had marked it as protected, sacred, a place to be watched over and left alone. The Krethval had other plans. They would harvest the planet, strip it bare, take every living thing on it and use them however they pleased. That was what the Dominion did. That was what they had always done. And no one in the galaxy stopped them because no one in the galaxy was strong enough. Sayith crawled to the communications panel. Half of it was dark, burned out by the last attack. But the backup systems were still running on emergency power, and she had enough to send one signal. Just one. She did not send it to the Galactic Council. The Council would debate for weeks. They would issue a statement of concern. They would form a committee. By the time they finished talking, the Velari crew would be long dead and the nursery world would be a graveyard. She did not send it to the Velari homeworld. Her people had no warships. They would mourn her, and that would be all. Instead, Sayith did something that most species in the galaxy would have called insane. She opened a channel that had not been used in 300 years, a frequency so old it was barely even listed in modern communication databases. Most engineers had removed it from their systems entirely, calling it obsolete, a relic of a forgotten age. Channel 0. Her grandmother had told her about it when Sayith was just a child, barely old enough to understand the words. Her grandmother had served on a diplomatic vessel during the burning Nebula conflict, decades ago, when the Velari had been cornered by raiders and left to die by a galaxy that was too busy with its own problems to care. In desperation, her grandmother's captain had transmitted on an old frequency, a frequency given to them by a species that most of the galaxy preferred to forget. And something had answered. Her grandmother never spoke about what happened next in detail. She would only say that the raiders were gone within hours, and that the beings who saved them were the most terrifying and the most gentle creatures she had ever encountered. They came from a world called Earth, a Class 12 death world, a planet so hostile, so violent, so overflowing with danger that simply being born there and surviving to adulthood was considered an impossible achievement by galactic standards. They called themselves humans. The galaxy had not reacted well to humanity's arrival on the galactic stage. At first there had been curiosity, then unease, then outright fear. Humans were too adaptable, too persistent. They could eat foods that were poisonous to other species. They could survive injuries that would kill most beings 3 times over. They healed from broken bones. They functioned without sleep for days. They formed emotional bonds with anything, animals, machines, even species that were actively trying to kill them. And when they went to war, they were absolutely and completely without mercy. During the Reclamation Wars, humanity had liberated 6 enslaved species in a single campaign. They had dismantled the slavers' empire in 3 months. 3 months. Empires that had stood for thousands of years, wiped away like dust. The galaxy watched in horror. Not because humanity had freed slaves, everyone agreed that was noble, but because of the cold, surgical, terrifying efficiency with which they had done it. Humanity did not fight like other species. They did not posture or threaten or display. They simply arrived, and then the war was over. The Galactic Council, in its wisdom, had decided that humanity was too dangerous to coexist with. They had voted to label humans as a persistent class Deathworld species and had pressured them to withdraw from galactic society. Leave. Go away. You frighten us. And the humans, to everyone's shock, had agreed. They had not argued. They had not fought. They had simply nodded as if they had expected this all along, and they had said 5 words that Sayith's grandmother had repeated to her in a whisper, as though they were a prayer. We'll be in the dark. They had retreated into a region of space called the Dark, a massive cluster of nebulae soaked in radiation so intense that it would kill most species within hours. No one followed them. No one could. And over 300 years, the galaxy had slowly, gratefully forgotten about them. But Sayith's grandmother had not forgotten, and neither had Sayith. With shaking fingers, she tuned the communications panel to channel 0. The frequency hummed to life, ancient and strange, like opening a door that had been sealed for centuries. Another explosion hit the ship, and the ceiling above her cracked. She was running out of time. Sayith did not know much of the human language. She had learned only a few words from her grandmother, practiced in secret like a forbidden song. But she knew enough. She pressed the transmit button and spoke into the static. "This is a friend. We are dying, please." The words vanished into the void. The static hissed and crackled. Around her, the ship groaned as the Krethval tore another section away. Silence. Sayith closed her eyes. Perhaps the humans were gone. Perhaps they had died in the dark, killed by the very radiation that hid them. Perhaps they had simply stopped caring about a galaxy that had thrown them away. She would not have blamed them. She would not have blamed them at all. Then the static changed. It was subtle, a shift in the pattern, a single pulse of energy, clean and sharp, cutting through the noise like a knife through silk. Not a voice. Not a message, just a ping, a simple, unmistakable acknowledgement signal. Received. Somewhere in the dark, something had heard her. Something was awake. Something was coming. Sayith pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the communications panel and allowed herself, for the first time since the attack began, to hope. Across 3 sectors of empty space, in the black heart of a nebula that burned with enough radiation to sterilize a continent, lights began to turn on aboard ships that had been silent for 300 years. Engines that had never been tested in real combat hummed to life. Crews who had trained their entire lives for a moment they secretly believed would never come moved to their stations with quiet, practiced efficiency. The dark stirred, and the wolves began to wake. Admiral Koa Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Memento Mori and watched the signal play across her screen for the 3rd time. The words were simple. The voice behind them was not. She could hear the fear in it, the desperation, the faint trembling of someone who had bet everything on a prayer they did not fully believe in. "This is a friend. We are dying, please." 3 sentences, that was all it took. Vasquez was 63 years old, which by human standards in the current age made her middle-aged. Medical technology inside the dark had advanced far beyond what the rest of the galaxy used. Humans lived longer now, healed faster, thought more clearly. 300 years of isolation had not slowed them down. It had set them free. She was tall and lean, with deep brown skin and silver hair cut close to her skull. A scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, a training accident from her years in the radiation combat exercises that every officer went through. Her eyes were dark and steady, the eyes of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for a moment exactly like this one. Around her, the bridge of the Memento Mori was already in motion. Officers moved with calm precision, no shouting, no panic. They had drilled this scenario thousands of times. Every crew member on every ship in the fleet had trained for the day when Channel Zero would finally speak again. Signal origin, Vasquez asked. Pale threshold region, her communications officer, Lieutenant Akafer, reported. Velari vessel, science class, surrounded by Krethval Dominion signatures, at least 400. 400 ships against one unarmed science vessel, Vasquez said quietly. That sounds about right for the Dominion. She turned to face her bridge crew, 20 men and women, every one of them born and raised inside the dark. They had grown up in the nebula stations of Bastion, humanity's hidden civilization, a network of thousands of habitats, shipyards, research centers, and colony worlds built inside the most hostile environment in the known galaxy. They had been raised in higher gravity than Earth. They had trained in radiation storms that would have killed any other species in minutes. They ate food that most galactic races would classify as toxic. They ran combat simulations in conditions that the Galactic Council would have declared war crimes. They were, by any reasonable measure, the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever produced, and they had been waiting for this call for 300 years. Protocol open hand, Vasquez said, full activation. The words moved through the fleet like electricity through water. Protocol open hand was simple. It was the oldest standing order in the United Earth Navy, written on the day humanity had withdrawn from galactic society and never once amended. It said, any distress call received on Channel Zero from any species for any reason will be answered with the full strength of the reclamation fleet. No debate, no committee, no vote. You hear a cry for help, you go. The order spread outward from the Memento Mori to every ship in Bastion, and there were many ships. The galaxy, in its comfortable ignorance, had assumed that humanity had withered in exile, that living inside a radiation-soaked nebula cluster would have reduced them to scattered survivors clinging to a handful of dying stations. They could not have been more wrong. Humanity had not merely survived in the dark, humanity had thrived. Without the Galactic Council's endless regulations, without the trade restrictions and technology-sharing agreements that kept every species at roughly the same level, humanity had been free to push boundaries that the rest of the galaxy did not even know existed. They had cracked problems in physics that the Council's best scientists had declared unsolvable. They had developed materials by mining the debris fields around neutron stars, materials so strong that no known weapon could scratch them. They had built engines that bent space in ways that would have given a Galactic Council physicist a panic attack. And they had built ships, so many ships. The reclamation fleet, known informally among its crews as the Answered Prayer, was not a fleet in the traditional sense. It was an armada, dreadnoughts the size of small moons, carriers that launched fighter craft by the thousands, frigates so fast they could cross a star system in the time it took to blink, and all of them built from materials that drank radiation like water, powered by reactors that the rest of the galaxy had not even theorized yet. But the ships were not the most impressive part, the people were. 3 centuries of living on a death world inside a death nebula had changed humanity, not into monsters, into something more refined. Every generation had been stronger, faster, more resilient than the last. Not through genetic manipulation, humanity had strict rules about that, but through the simple, grinding process of natural adaptation. The weak did not survive in the dark. The careless did not survive. The cruel did not survive. What was left was a species honed to a razor edge, carrying the full weight of Earth's evolutionary heritage. The persistence, the adaptability, the stubborn refusal to die, amplified by 300 years of living in conditions that would have exterminated any other civilization. And they were not bitter. That was the part that would have surprised the galaxy most of all. They had every right to be bitter. They had been cast out for the crime of being too good at protecting others. They had been punished for freeing slaves, exiled for being too effective, banished for making weaker species feel uncomfortable with their own cowardice. A lesser civilization would have turned inward, would have grown hateful, would have plotted revenge. Humanity had done none of those things. Instead, they had built schools, hospitals, universities, art galleries that floated in the hearts of nebulae, filled with paintings and sculptures and music created by people who refused to let exile steal their joy. They raised their children with stories of the galaxy outside, not as enemies but as neighbors. Difficult neighbors, frightened neighbors, but neighbors all the same. And they had kept Channel Zero open. Every single day for 300 years, someone had been listening, waiting, hoping that the call would come and dreading it in equal measure, because the call would mean that someone out there was suffering, and humanity could not bear the thought of suffering it could prevent. Admiral Vasquez looked out through the bridge viewport at the fleet assembling around her. Ship after ship emerging from the stations of Bastion, their black hulls drinking the nebula's light, their engines glowing with a faint blue fire that was the only sign they were alive. They moved in perfect formation, hundreds of vessels falling into place with the precision of a heartbeat. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Vasquez," she said. Her voice was calm, almost warm, like a teacher addressing a class she was proud of. 300 years ago, the galaxy told us we were monsters. They said we were too dangerous, too violent, too much. They asked us to leave and we left. We did not argue, we did not fight. We came here to the dark and we built something extraordinary. We built a home. We raised families. We created art and science and medicine that the galaxy cannot even imagine yet. She paused. 10 minutes ago, someone called for help. A Velari science vessel, unarmed, under attack by the Krethval Dominion. 400 warships against one ship full of scientists who have never held a weapon in their lives. The bridge was silent. Every eye was on her. "The galaxy told us we were monsters," Vasquez repeated. "And maybe they were right, but monsters are exactly what you want when something worse comes in the night. All ships set course for the pale threshold, maximum speed, silent running." She closed the channel. The fleet moved. Hundreds of ships, the most advanced and powerful warships ever constructed by any species in galactic history, slid forward through the nebula like shadows through fog. Their stealth systems engaged, bending light and energy around their hulls until they were invisible to every known form of detection. To any sensor in the galaxy, the space they occupied would read as empty, cold, dead. They passed through the outer boundary of the dark and entered open space for the first time in 3 centuries. Stars that had only been numbers on a navigation chart became real, visible, close. The galaxy that had thrown them away spread out before them in all its fragile, beautiful, ungrateful glory. Not one member of the fleet hesitated. They had been called, they would answer, that was all that mattered. The wolves moved through the night, silent and sure, and the galaxy did not hear them coming. War Alpha Grenak stood on the command platform of his flagship, the Crushing Tide, and watched the Velari ship come apart on his display screen. He was enjoying himself. There was no reason to rush this. The prey was cornered, the hunt was won, and the only thing left was the pleasure of a slow finish. He was enormous, even by Krethval standards. 9.5 feet of scaled muscle and armored bone, with claws that could tear through hull plating and teeth designed for ripping flesh from bone. His species had evolved on a world of endless predation, a place where everything ate everything else and only the strongest survived to breed. They had carried that philosophy into the stars, and it had served them well. The Krethval Dominion controlled 37 systems. They had conquered or enslaved a dozen species. No one challenged them because no one could match their ferocity. Grenax clicked his claws together in satisfaction as another section of the Velari ship's hull peeled away under sustained weapons fire. His war swarm surrounded the tiny vessel like a fist around an insect. 412 ships. It was absurd overkill for a single unarmed science vessel, but Grenax believed in sending a message. The Velari had something he wanted, the location of a nursery world, and he intended to take it. After that, his fleet would descend on the planet, harvest every living thing on it, and use them however the Dominion saw fit. That was the natural order. The strong took, the weak gave. Anyone who believed otherwise was simply prey that had not been caught yet. War Alpha, his sensor officer called from across the bridge. There is something unusual on the rear scans. Grenax did not turn around. Define unusual. A section of space behind our formation. The star readings are inconsistent. Some points are not registering. A nebula drift, sensor ghost, ignore it. Yes, War Alpha. Grenax returned his attention to the Velari ship. He was composing the broadcast he would send to the Dominion homeworld, a recording of the ship's destruction, set to dramatic music, with his personal narration describing the glorious hunt. His people loved such recordings. They played them at feasts and celebrations. The weaker the prey, the more entertaining the hunt was considered, because it demonstrated the absolute dominance of the Krethval over all lesser forms of life. He was just deciding on the right moment to deliver the final killing blow when every light on his bridge went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, went out. Every display, every console, every indicator light, all of them died simultaneously, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness. For 2 heartbeats, there was nothing but the sound of his crew breathing. Then the emergency lights came on, painting everything in a dull red glow, and Grenax's sensor officer spoke again. This time, his voice was different. This time, his voice was afraid. War Alpha, our targeting systems are offline, all of them. Grenax turned slowly. What? Communications are down. Shield generators are not responding. Weapons systems are locked out. This is not a malfunction. Something is actively disrupting our systems. Every ship in the swarm is reporting the same failures, all at once. Grenax opened his mouth to respond, and then the viewport in front of him showed him something that made the words die in his throat. The stars behind his fleet were coming back. The empty patch of space that his sensor officer had dismissed was filling in, but not with stars, with shapes, dark, angular shapes that had not been there a moment ago, appearing out of nothing as if the universe itself was revealing something it had been hiding. Ships. Hundreds of them. They did not arrive with the flash of faster-than-light drives. They did not announce themselves with energy signatures or communication hails. They simply appeared, as if they had been there the entire time and had only now decided to let themselves be seen. Black-hulled vessels of every size, from frigates to cruisers to things so large they made his flagship look like a shuttle. Their surfaces were scarred and pitted, as if they had been bathed in radiation for centuries. They carried no markings, no flags, no identifying symbols of any kind. They were just there, a wall of silent, dark metal between his fleet and the open stars. Grenax had never felt fear before. Not real fear. He had been startled in battle, had felt the rush of adrenaline when prey fought back harder than expected. But true fear, the deep, cold, ancient fear of something so far beyond you that fighting it is not courage but insanity, that was new. A signal cut through the dead communication systems on every Krethval ship simultaneously, not on their frequencies, not through their technology. It simply appeared in their speakers as if the laws of physics had decided to make an exception. The voice was female calm and carried the warmth of someone who had all the time in the universe. Krethval Dominion vessels, you are engaged in hostilities against a species that has requested our aid. You have 90 seconds to power down all weapons and surrender your fleet. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy. You will not receive another." The bridge was silent. Grenax's officers stared at their dead consoles, then at the viewport, then at him. He could see it in their eyes, the question they did not dare ask. What do we do? Grenax was a predator. He had been born a predator, raised as a predator, celebrated as a predator his entire life. He did not surrender. He did not bow. He did not feel small. He was War Alpha Grenax of the Krethval Dominion, and he had never lost. "Reroute all available power to weapons," he snarled. "Every ship that can fire, fire, now." The ships that still had partial weapons capability obeyed. Beams of energy and volleys of kinetic rounds lanced out from the Krethval formation toward the Dark Fleet. The shots that reached their targets splashed against the black holes and vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed, simply gone, as if the energy had been swallowed by something that considered it beneath notice. There was a pause, a single, horrible moment of silence in which the entire Krethval warswarm hung in space and waited. The Dark Fleet fired back, once. It was a single coordinated volley, every ship firing at the same instant with a precision that should not have been possible. 43 Krethval warships, the ones that had fired, ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris, no expanding cloud of gas and shrapnel. The ships were simply there, and then they were not. Converted to raw energy so completely and so efficiently that nothing remained. Not a scrap of metal, not a molecule. Just empty space, where warships had been a heartbeat before. The rest of the Krethval fleet shattered. Not physically, psychologically. 300 ships broke formation at once, scattering in every direction like animals fleeing a forest fire. Some tried to engage their faster-than-light drives and found them locked. Some broadcast surrender signals on every frequency they could reach. Some simply went dead in space, their crews too paralyzed by terror to operate their own controls. Grenax watched his invincible war swarm disintegrate around him, and something inside him broke. Not his courage, something deeper. The certainty that had defined his entire existence. The absolute, unshakable belief that the Krethval were the apex of creation, crumbled like ash in his chest. But he was still Grenax. And if he could not win, he could still take something from these ghosts. He could still deny them their prize. "All power to engines," he roared. "Ramming course, the Velari ship. If we cannot have the nursery world, neither will they." The crushing tide surged forward, its massive engines driving it toward the crippled hymn of gentle tides like a battering ram. The Velari vessel was dead in space, unable to move, unable to dodge. Grenax bared his teeth. He would crush it. He would destroy the research data, kill the crew, and leave nothing for these dark strangers to save. He was halfway to his target when a single ship moved to block his path. It was a frigate, a human frigate. It was 1/10 the size of his flagship. It had no visible weapons, no shields that his sensors, the few that still worked, could detect. It was called the Kind Regards, and it simply positioned itself between the crushing tide and the Velari ship and stopped. It did not fire. It did not retreat. It did not even adjust its position. It just waited. Grenax did not slow down. His flagship, 2 million tons of Krethval engineering, slammed into the tiny human frigate at full speed. And stopped. The crushing tide crumpled like paper against a stone. The impact that should have swatted the frigate aside like a toy instead folded the Krethval flagship in on itself, its bow compressing, its hull buckling, its superstructure twisting. The Kind Regards hung motionless, undamaged, surrounded by a shimmer of energy that rippled once and then went still. On the bridge of the crushing tide, Grenax lay in the wreckage of his command platform, bleeding from a dozen wounds, staring through a cracked viewport at the tiny ship that had just killed his flagship without firing a single shot. The calm female voice returned to his speakers one last time. "Surrender accepted. Medical teams are on the way. Please do not resist. We would prefer not to add to today's casualties." Grenex closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, the predator understood what it felt like to be prey. Corporal Dreth of the Krethval Dominion had served in 14 campaigns. He had boarded enemy vessels, fought in close combat against species that outnumbered his squad 10 to 1, and had earned every scar on his body through violence he was proud of. He was a warrior. He was Krethval. He did not know what fear tasted like. He learned in the space of 30 seconds. The humans came through the breach in the crushing tide's hull without making a sound. That was the first wrong thing. Boarding actions were loud. They were supposed to be loud: explosions, gunfire, screaming. That was how war worked. But the human Marines moved through the wrecked corridors of the flagship like water flowing through cracks, silent and smooth, and impossibly fast for creatures their size. They were smaller than the Krethval. That was something Dreth had expected. Most species were smaller, but they were not small in the way the Velari were small, fragile, and breakable. These humans were dense, compact. They moved with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute control over every muscle in their bodies. Their armor was dark and form-fitting, nothing like the heavy plate the Krethval wore, and it seemed to drink the light the same way their ships did. Dreth and his squad had set up a defensive position in a corridor junction, using overturned equipment as cover. There were 12 of them, all veterans, all armed with plasma repeaters that could burn through a ship's inner wall. They waited in the red emergency lighting, claws tight on their weapons, listening. The first human appeared at the end of the corridor, and Dreth's squad opened fire. Every shot hit. Dreth saw the plasma round strike the human's chest, shoulder, and abdomen. The impacts would have killed any species he had ever fought. The human stumbled back one step, just one. Then it straightened up, looked down at the scorch marks on its armor, and kept walking forward. Not running, walking. A second plasma round caught the human in the gap between its chest plate and shoulder guard, an unarmored spot. The round burned through, and Dreth saw blood. Real blood, red and bright, pouring from the wound. The human grunted, reached up with one hand, and pressed a small device against the wound. The bleeding slowed. The human shifted its weapon to its other hand and continued advancing. It had field-dressed a combat wound while walking toward enemy fire, without stopping, without taking cover, without even changing its pace. Behind it, more humans emerged. They did not fire back. They simply advanced, absorbing plasma fire that should have been lethal, closing the distance with a patience that was more terrifying than any charge. Dreth's squad was hitting them, hurting them, drawing blood, and it did not matter. The humans treated the incoming fire as a minor inconvenience, like rain during a walk. When they were close enough, one of them spoke. It spoke in Krethval. Not badly, not with the mangled accent of a translation device, but in fluid, natural Krethval, as if the human had grown up speaking the language. "You have fought well. Your weapons are effective and your positioning is sound. But this engagement is over. Drop your weapons and you will be treated with dignity. You have my word." Dreth dropped his weapon. He did not decide to do it. His hands simply let go, as if some ancient part of his brain, the part that existed before civilization, before pride, before the concept of being Krethval, had recognized a superior predator and had made the decision for him. His squad followed one by one. The humans secured them with restraints that were firm, but did not cut into their scales. A medic examined each prisoner and treated the two who had been injured by shrapnel during the flagship's collision. The medic worked with the same calm efficiency as the soldiers, as if patching up the enemy was simply the next task on a list that did not distinguish between friend and foe. 3 decks above, a different kind of rescue was underway. The Hymn of Gentle Tides was dying. Its hull was breached in 11 places, its life support was failing, and a third of its crew was dead or injured. The survivors had gathered in the ship's central laboratory, the only section that still had breathable air, huddled together in the blue glow of their own terrified bioluminescence. When the airlock opened and the first human stepped through, every Velari in the room pressed against the far wall. They could not help it. The human was enormous by their standards, 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with hands that could have wrapped around a Velari's entire torso. It wore medical insignia on its armor, but it was still human, still a creature from a Class 12 Deathworld, still something that the galaxy had declared too dangerous to live among civilized species. The human stopped in the doorway. It looked at the room full of small, glowing, terrified beings, and then it did something that none of them expected. It knelt down. Slowly and carefully, it lowered itself to the floor until it was at eye level with the nearest Velari. It placed its weapon on the ground and pushed it away. Then it held up its open hands, empty, palms forward, and spoke in accented but careful Velari. "My name is Sergeant Adiz Obi. I am a medic with the United Earth Navy. We received your distress call. I am here to help you. May I come in?" It asked permission. This creature, this Deathworlder who could have torn the door off its hinges and walked in without a word, asked permission to enter. The Velari chief scientist, a trembling elder named Korath, nodded slowly. What followed was something the Velari crew would talk about for the rest of their lives. The human medical team, 6 of them, all trained in xenobiology and xenomedicine, moved through the wounded with a gentleness that defied everything the Velari had been told about their species. They splinted broken limbs with tools sized for Velari bodies. They calibrated their medications for Velari physiology. They had come prepared, carrying supplies designed specifically for the species they were rescuing, as if they had known exactly who would be calling for help. In a far corner of the laboratory, a young Velari engineer named Pelith was dying. The shrapnel wound in her side was too severe, the blood loss too great. She was past the point where medicine could reach her. She knew it. The human medic who examined her knew it. They looked at each other, and in that look was a truth that needed no translation. The medic, a young man with dark eyes and steady hands, sat down beside her. He did not try to offer false hope. He did not say she would be fine. He simply sat with her, cross-legged on the cold metal floor, and after a moment of silence he began to hum. It was a melody, soft and slow and impossibly tender, the kind of song that a parent might sing to a child who was afraid of the dark. The medic had found it in the ship's cultural database during the walk from the airlock to the laboratory. He had learned a Velari lullaby in the time it took to cross a corridor, and now he was singing it to a stranger who was about to die. Pelith closed her eyes. The glow of her skin softened from the sharp blue of terror to a gentle, warm violet, the color, among the Velari, of peace. She died listening to a song from her own childhood, sung by a being from the most dangerous world in the galaxy, who had crossed 300 years of exile and 3 sectors of empty space to sit with her at the end. When Ambassador Sayith was brought to the Memento Mori, she was treated in the ship's medical bay and then invited to dine with Admiral Vasquez. The meal was simple, human field rations, which the Velari found surprisingly complex and flavorful. They sat across from each other at a small table in the Admiral's quarters, the vast silence of space visible through the viewport behind them. "You came," Sayith said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We always come," Vasquez said. "That was the promise. 300 years. We abandoned you. We voted to send you away. We did nothing when the council exiled you, and you still came." Vasquez poured water into a cup and set it in front of Sayith, sized for Velari hands. She had Velari-sized cups ready. She had been ready for this meal for 300 years. "You asked us to leave and we left," Vasquez said. "But we never stopped listening, we never stopped preparing. Every generation we trained for the day the call would come. Every generation we told our children that somewhere out there someone would need help. And when that day came, we would be ready, not for revenge, not for politics, just to help." Sayith stared at her. "Why, after everything the galaxy did to you, Why would you stay? Vasquez looked at the stars through the viewport. Because you are our neighbors, she said, and where we come from you do not abandon your neighbors, even the ones who are afraid of you, even the ones who ask you to leave. You keep the porch light on and you listen for the call. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done. Sayeth's skin glowed a deep, quiet violet, and for the second time since the attack began she wept. Not from pain, not from relief, from the weight of understanding what the galaxy had thrown away and what, against all reason and all justice, it had not lost. The Galactic Council chamber on Ethais Prime was the largest enclosed space ever built by any civilization in known history. It was a sphere of crystal and living light, suspended in orbit around a gas giant, capable of holding representatives from every sentient species that had ever signed the Galactic Compact. In 3,000 years of galactic politics, it had seen wars declared and ended, alliances forged and broken, and empires rise and fall. It had never seen anything like today. Every seat was filled, every species was represented, and the air was thick with something the Council had not felt in a very long time: real, undeniable fear. News of what had happened in the Pale Threshold had spread across the galaxy in a matter of days. Not through official channels, the Council had tried to suppress it, but through independent networks, trading ships, and the unstoppable tide of rumor that moves faster than light. The details varied from telling to telling, but the core facts remained the same. The Krethval Dominion, the most feared military power in the galaxy, had sent a war swarm of 400 ships to attack a single unarmed vessel. And then something had come out of the dark and dismantled them. Not defeated, dismantled, with one volley and a polite suggestion to surrender. The Krethval Dominion was in chaos. Grenax was alive, imprisoned aboard a human ship, and the evidence the humans had recovered from his flagship's computers was now public. Every plan, every order, every recording of Dominion atrocities, the slave markets, the harvested worlds, the species they had driven to extinction for sport, all of it was now available for the galaxy to see. The Dominion's allies were abandoning them. Their conquered territories were in open revolt. An empire built on fear was discovering what happened when something more frightening appeared. But the Council was not focused on the Dominion's collapse. The Council was focused on the thing that had caused it. Humanity was back. The emergency session had been called within hours of the news breaking. Representatives who had not spoken to each other in decades were huddled together, whispering, arguing, bargaining. The dominant emotion in the chamber was not gratitude. It was panic. The Thulmuri representative, a tall crystalline being whose species had been the loudest voice in favor of humanity's exile 3 centuries ago, took the floor first. "This is precisely what we warned about," he said, his voice ringing through the chamber like struck glass. "The humans are a destabilizing force. Their military capability is beyond anything we projected. They have spent 300 years in isolation developing weapons and technology we cannot match, and now they have demonstrated a willingness to use force without Council authorization. They must be contained. They must be pushed back into the dark. If necessary, we must consider a united military response." There were murmurs of agreement from several delegations. The fear in the room was feeding on itself, growing, building towards something that looked very much like the same mistake the galaxy had made 300 years ago. Then Ambassador Sayeth took the floor. She was still bandaged. One arm was in a sling, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin were dim from weeks of recovery. She walked slowly to the central platform, her small frame dwarfed by the vast chamber around her, and she stood there in silence until every voice in the room went quiet. "I would like to tell you what happened to my crew," she said. Her voice was soft but carried perfectly through the chamber's acoustics. "We were a science vessel, 42 researchers, 12 support staff, 1 ambassador. We had no weapons. We were studying a planet where life was just beginning, a world of simple creatures taking their first steps. The Krethval came to take that planet, to harvest it, to strip every living thing from its surface and use them as they pleased. She paused. We sent distress calls to this council. We received an automated acknowledgement and a notice that our case would be reviewed within 30 standard days. 30 days. We had 30 minutes. The chamber was silent now, not the silence of attention, the silence of guilt. We sent calls to every military power in the compact. The Volmuri told us they could not intervene in a disputed sector. The Urani said their fleet was committed elsewhere. The Wessex Confederation expressed concern and offered thoughts of solidarity. Her voice did not waver, but her skin pulsed with a faint, cold blue. Thoughts of solidarity, while my people were being torn apart. She turned slowly, looking at every delegation in turn. There was only one frequency left. A channel abandoned 300 years ago. A channel that connected to a species this council voted to exile because they made us uncomfortable. Because they were too good at war. Because when they freed 6 slave races in 3 months, it made us look at ourselves and realize we could have done the same thing at any time and simply chose not to. The Volmuri representative shifted in his seat. I called the humans, Sayith said, and they came. 400 Krethval warships, and the humans dismantled them in 11 minutes. 11 minutes. And then they did something that none of you would have done. They sent medics aboard my ship. They treated our wounded. They sat with our dying. One of their soldiers held my engineer's hand as she passed and sang her a Velari lullaby he had learned minutes before because he did not want her to die alone. She let the silence hold. You did not exile the humans because they were dangerous. You exiled them because they were brave, and their bravery made your cowardice visible. They saved 6 species from slavery, and instead of thanking them, you punished them for reminding you that you could have done the same. You cast out the only species in this galaxy willing to bleed for strangers, and then you spent 300 years pretending they never existed, while empires like the Dominion grew fat on the suffering of those too weak to resist. She stepped back from the platform. I did not come here to argue for humanity's readmission. I came here to tell you what I saw so that when you make your decision today, you make it with open eyes. The humans are out there. They are more advanced than anything in this galaxy, and they are not angry. They are not seeking revenge. They are simply waiting, as they have always been. The chamber erupted into debate, but the tone had shifted. The fear was still there, but it was mixed now with something else, something harder to dismiss. Shame. When the noise finally settled, the council acknowledged a transmission request from a source that had not addressed the chamber in 3 centuries. Admiral Koa Vasquez appeared as a holographic projection in the center of the room. She did not step onto Ethais Prime. She had been very clear about that. She would not set foot on a station that had once banned her kind. She stood in the hologram with her hands clasped behind her back, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes steady and calm. She looked at the assembled representatives of 100 species, and she did not smile and she did not frown. I will be brief, she said. Humanity does not seek readmission to the Galactic Compact. We do not want a council seat. We do not want trade agreements, diplomatic recognition, or apologies. We want nothing from you. The chamber was absolutely still. But I want to be clear about one thing. Channel 0 will remain open. It will remain open today, tomorrow, and for as long as humanity exists. Any species, anywhere, for any reason, can transmit a call for help on that frequency, and we will answer. We will not ask for payment. We will not ask for gratitude. We will not negotiate terms. We will simply come. She paused. You called us monsters 300 years ago. Perhaps you were right. But we are the kind of monsters who come when you scream in the dark, and we will never stop coming. The hologram faded. In the weeks that followed, something extraordinary happened. Channel 0, silent for 3 centuries, began to light up. A mining colony in the Tesserae Belt. Besieged by pirates who had been raiding them for years while the council debated jurisdiction, transmitted a desperate plea. 6 hours later, a human strike force arrived, neutralized the pirates, rebuilt the colony's defenses, and left behind enough supplies to last 3 years. They did not stay. They did not ask for anything. A refugee fleet, 200,000 Pelori civilians fleeing a civil war, found themselves stranded in a dying system with failing life support and no fuel. They called Channel Zero. Human supply ships arrived within a day, refueled the fleet, repaired their life support, and escorted them to a safe system. A human doctor stayed behind for a month to treat a disease outbreak among the refugees. When the Pelori asked her why, she seemed confused by the question. "Because you needed a doctor," she said. A species called the Morvathi, on the brink of extinction from a plague that their own medical science could not cure, called Channel Zero as a final act of desperation. Human medical researchers arrived with treatments derived from 3 centuries of advanced pharmaceutical science. They saved 97% of the Morvathi population. The Morvathi government tried to send payment. The humans sent it back with a note that said simply, "Get well soon." Each time the same pattern, a call into the dark, a single acknowledgement ping, and then the wolves would emerge, silent and scarred and impossibly gentle, to do what they had always been meant to do. On the Villari homeworld, months after the rescue, Ambassador Sayith sat in the garden behind her family home with her grandchild on her lap. The evening sky was painted in shades of gold and violet, and the air smelled of the sweet moss that grew along the riverbanks. "Tell me the story again, grandmother," the child said. Sayith smiled. She held up a small communication device, old, battered, with a frequency dial that was permanently set to a single channel. "There is a place in space called the dark," she said. "It is full of radiation and storms and things that would kill us in minutes, and inside it there lives a species called humans. They came from a world so dangerous that just surviving there is considered impossible. A long time ago, the galaxy was afraid of them and it sent them away. But the humans did not become angry. They went into the dark and they built something wonderful, and they left one door open, one frequency, one promise." She pressed the device into her grandchild's small hands. "If you are ever in danger," she said, "if you are ever alone and afraid and there is no one left to help you, you press this button and you speak into the static. And they will hear you. They will always hear you." The child looked up at her with wide, luminous eyes. "But grandmother, the humans, aren't they scary?" Sayith looked up at the darkening sky, where the stars were beginning to appear, and somewhere beyond them, in a place no one else could survive, a civilization of impossible, stubborn, beautiful monsters was listening to the void, waiting for the next call, ready to cross the galaxy for a stranger's cry. "Yes, little one," she said softly, "that is precisely why we call them." Far away in the dark the wolves waited. The porch light was on. The frequency was open. And humanity listened.